Anders Zorn was a Swedish painter who was active in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. He is renowned not only for his masterful portraits and nudes, but also for his use of a remarkably limited palette. Known as the Zorn palette, it typically includes just 4 colors: yellow ochre, vermilion, ivory black, and lead white. Despite its simplicity, this palette allowed Zorn to create a wide range of harmonious, lifelike tones, which demonstrated his deep understanding of color temperature and value relationships. His approach is still widely used and studied today for its simplicity, efficiency, and elegance. In this demonstration, I want to show you a simple and quick method for mixing oil paint using the Zorn palette to paint a brown egg. Zorn's palette was made up of 4 colors. He used yellow ochre, vermilion, ivory black, and lead white. Silver white is the Holbein version of lead white. Ivory black is a blue black. Vermilion is the red that was common during the period when Zorn was working. Today, vermilion is pretty hard to come by. It's pretty rare, and it's also a very expensive color when you can find it. So you can replace the vermilion with a cadmium red light, and it will be a very similar color. He also used the yellow ochre, which is of course very common and a very inexpensive color. So with a limited palette, you can mix up a pretty good range of colors, especially if you're doing portraiture or figurative work, or if you're painting things like a brown egg. You can get to those colors pretty easily with just these 4 colors, so you don't have to spend a lot. An alternative to silver white is titanium white. Titanium white is a very inexpensive color. It is a bit more opaque than lead white, so you'll have to use a little bit less whenever you're tinting a color. If you're using lead white, you're going to want to use a little bit more because it is a bit more transparent. So I'm going to set up my palette now, and I'll put my yellow ochre here. I'll put my vermilion, or if you're using cadmium yellow light, use that. Ivory black. Ivory black is a blue black. So we essentially have the 3 primary colors here: yellow, red, and blue. And we have our white, which we use to tint. We can also mix up a range of grays in order to create tones. In this case, we're just going to mix up the colors that we see in the egg. A few paper towels down. Okay. So to start my mixing, I'll begin with my yellow ochre. Take a good amount there, place it here. Before I grab another color, I'm going to wipe my knife. If I keep my knife clean when I'm grabbing from my original piles, I'm not going to contaminate these piles with the color that I've just put down. And that way we can keep our colors really pure when we're mixing them. So we'll just start with a small amount. What I'm trying to do here is to create a red-orange, which is essentially what the color of the egg is. It's red-orange. And I think simplifying colors, or names of colors, is a pretty good idea. There are words that we can use to name colors that we would basically call fashion names. And so I like to keep it simple and think of the source color. So I need to go a little redder. I'll add more red. Start with small amounts when you're trying to change a color. When we use a smaller amount, we won't overly color it or oversaturate a color. We want to start with a smaller amount because we can always add more if we need to. And what I want to do with this pile, this is going to be basically sort of a base pile, or my origin for the colors that I can mix later to create value shifts, which I'll show in a little bit. I'll show you how to make a string. But I've got this color mixed up. If I just kind of hover over the egg, and I can see that I might be getting close. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Nothing's ever going to be perfect. but we can get close. We're trying to get a representation of the color of that egg. So next I want to make the color of the shadow zone of the egg. This is called a form shadow. This is called a cast shadow. So now I want to mix up a color that's close to that. And I'm going to really be looking at this area right here, which is basically the darkest part of the form shadow. Some people call that a terminator line. That's generally how I refer to it. Some call it a bed bug line, because that's, I guess, where the bed bugs hide. Some might call it the core shadow, and some might call it the shadow accent. It's all pretty much the same. So one of the things we can look at as I'm doing this is how I'm mixing, how I'm incorporating the colors. And lots of people have various ways of mixing with a palette knife. I tend to pick it up and then put it back down again. Pick it up, put it back down. You might want to do this, kind of stir it around, that's fine. But I have found that by doing this, I can keep my palette very neat, very tidy. And I think it's important to maintain a clean palette, a tidy palette, because when we have a tidier palette, we can have more pure color. I don't think that's red enough, so I'm going to add some more red. And then I'm going to go for the black, the ivory black. And because ivory black is a blue black, I'm going to end up with a color that maybe starts out a little bit green, perhaps. We'll see. You can see how it's also dulling down that color quite a lot. Again, just mix up, incorporate all of those colors together so you don't end up with streaks of one color. You want to make it nice and clean. That's pretty close, I think. I think that's a good place to start. Now I want to mix up the color for the cast shadow over here. And this is more neutral. This is a neutral color. This is more gray. Gray and black and white are all called neutral colors. So I'll start with black, my ivory black. And I'm going to add white to the black rather than black to white, because I want to bring the value up just a little bit. And for this color, I'm going to mix up a range of grays. So I want to look at the darkest part of the shadow, which is just right underneath that egg. That's called the occlusion shadow. So it's going to be really dark under there, and from my point of view, this is about as dark as it gets. So I'll take a little bit of this, bring it down, wipe my knife, get that off of there, and I'm going to go grab some more white, tint this so that I have a value that's a little bit lighter than the one I just mixed. So I will have a range of values. And in this case, I'm only going to mix up 3 values. I don't need much more than that at this point. And if I need to later, as I'm painting the egg, I can adjust it. But these are sort of like the origin colors. There's that. Now I'll make one more value that is lighter than these 2. And then I'll have 3 values. I'll also have a middle value. It's really important that when you mix up strings a value, that you have a middle value. So mix up an uneven number, whether it's 7 or 5 or 9, whatever. In this case, I don't need more than 3. And I'll just put that right there. So here I've got a string going in this direction. Now I'm going to mix up strings for these two colors. And let me just tidy this up. Again, I can't emphasize strongly enough to keep your palette neat and tidy. Clean up as you go. It'll be a much better painting day when you clean up. Okay, so starting with this one, I'm going to just pull a little bit of this down and mix up a lighter version of this. Because in order to turn form in paint, we need a range of values. So I'll mix up 5 levels of value using this as my darkest value. And from my point of view, the darkest value in the light zone is right about here. And then we shift over into this dark zone, this shadow zone, where the darkest part of the shadow is right about here. And again, that's called the terminator line. So I'll grab some white. Again, in this case, I'm mixing white into the color rather than the color into the white, because I want to make very subtle value shifts. And if I were to start with white and mix the color in, I would have a color would be too light and it would take too long to mix it. These subtle shifts of value are what we see in our subjects. Having a range of values on your palette will help you to achieve your goal of turning form on your painting. So there's 1, 2, 3. This will be our middle value. And I'm not making huge piles. You can see that, I'm sure. And that's okay. I don't need huge piles right now because I'm not making a painting. This is purely for demonstration reasons that I'm doing this. But when you start, you're going to need more paint. So give yourself an opportunity to have plenty of paint ready to go before you start to paint. And I like to do this before I start a painting. As I'm showing you now, I like to mix these up and have them ready to go. There we go. So now I have a range of values for the light zone, including the highlight, which is kind of over here somewhere. And the highlight in this case is a diffuse. That is, it is very dull. The surface quality of the egg is dull, so the highlight is going to be diffuse. It's not going to be as shiny or super bright like you might see in glass or in jewels or in water, that sort of thing, metal. And so we don't need a super bright highlight for this. And highlights oftentimes are not actually white, like we might think they are. In this case, the highlight is actually more the color of the egg. And so that's as high as I want to go for that highlight. Or some call it a reflection. It actually is a reflection. Okay, so now I'm going to mix up a range of values for the shadow zone. And in this case, instead of using white, I'm going to start with red, because as we can see that this value, the value of this red, is much lighter than the value of this black, which is basically what we have in here. We have a mixture of yellow, red, and black in this, but this is a lighter value, and this is still a red-orange egg, so we want the shadow to have a little bit of, have more red in it. And so rather than using white, I'm going to start with red to bring that value up. if I can't get there, then I'm going to make a tint using white, and then I'll add that tint to this color. So that value is just slightly lighter, for sure. Because as you can see on this egg, you can see that from the terminator line, as we walk down the egg toward the cast shadow, things get lighter. There's some reflection that's occurring from the palette. The light is bouncing off of the palette and back up onto the egg, and so it's creating what's called a reflection. So let me just go ahead and show you how I would make a tint of this, and then how I would add it to that color. Instead of adding the pure white to the color, if I make a tint first and have this available on the palette, it's not going to desaturate the color as much as it would if I were to just add straight white to it. So I'll just put that up there. And then let's see what happens if we add just a little bit of this to this. Don't need much. So now we still have that reddish orange color, but it's lighter than the value of the terminator line. And now bring that down. I'm going to add a bit more red to this as well. And in this case, I don't really need more than 3 values. I'll come in and get this tint and add this in. So it's lighter, but not so saturated with the red. So now what I can do with this limited palette and this limited range of values on colors, I can paint the egg. I can adjust the colors as I go because I've got these ranges. I've got these grays, and if I wanted to, I could make more of these. I could make 5 levels or 7 levels of gray in order to create the tones. In fact, let's see what would happen if I just add some of this gray into this to create a tone. That's really quite beautiful. So this may be something that I might want to do. Instead of adding more red to that color, maybe I could add this. I could add a gray. It's not a bad idea to have a string of grays on your palette, no matter what you're painting, because we have the black to make a shade, and we have white to make a tint, but unless we squeeze a gray out of a tube, we don't really have a range of grays. So make a range of grays for your paintings, and you'll have those available if you need them. Because this is actually quite a beautiful color, and I might be able to use it in the shadow on the egg itself, or even in the cast shadow on the table. Again, this is a really limited palette. This is a limited range, but I can really expand on it when I'm starting to paint. I can continue to mix with a brush, or I can mix with a knife. It doesn't really matter. The other thing I want to show you is this knife itself. This is a Holbein palette knife. Holbein is a Japanese company, and they make beautiful products. This palette knife has a wooden ergonomic handle, so my hand doesn't get as tired when I mix a lot. I hold the knife like this. It has one single piece of metal. There's no joint right here. This is all one piece. It's very thin, so it's super, super flexible. And it's very, it's lightweight too, so there's not a heaviness to it at all. It doesn't strain my hand when I'm mixing. It's a bit more expensive than most palette knives, but it also has a lifetime guarantee. So it's kind of worth the investment. Okay, so to summarize, We had the 4 colors of the Zorn palette: yellow ochre, vermilion or cadmium red light, ivory black, which is a blue black, and I'm using lead white, but you can use titanium white. So we have our 3 primary colors plus white to tint with. I mixed up a base color, or an origin color for the overall color of the light zone of the egg, and then mixed up a range of values in order to create those turns. And then I have a shadow zone pile here, so I determined that this would be the darkest dark of that shadow zone, and then we get lighter and lighter. We don't need a lot of huge range of values here because there's not a lot of light in here. And then I made a range of 3 values for the shadow zone. And again, I can always go back and make adjustments. I can add more white, more gray, more saturated color to any of these as I'm making the painting. So in one of the next videos I'll show you actually how to paint the egg with this range of colors. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope to see you next time.